Hello, thanks for watching another episode of Lessons on Galatians. In the previous section, Paul offered the first of a series of autobiographical sketches that are going to continue through the first half of chapter 2. In his former life, his misguided zeal for Jewish law resulted in his persecution of the Christian church. He tried to destroy it. But God worked an about-face in Paul through the gospel. Not only did God call him to faith in Jesus, he called him to be an apostle who would preach the gospel to the Gentiles. Paul apparently went straight to work by preaching the gospel in Arabia, after which he returned to Damascus. All of this happened without any consultation with the leaders in the Christian church who had been apostles before he was. So the bottom line, Paul's gospel message did not originate with people, but came from God. His ministry did not originate with people, but he was called by God. In this next section, Paul gives us more autobiography. While the first sketch emphasized his independence of the other apostles, in this section he's going to demonstrate unity with them and unity with the Jewish Christians in the regions around Jerusalem. Then, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and stayed with him 15 days. I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. I assure you before God that what I am writing you is no lie. Later I went to Syria and Cilicia. I was personally unknown to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only heard the report, the man who formerly persecuted us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy, and they praised God because of me. Since the central moment in the previous paragraph is Paul's conversion, that's probably the starting point from which Paul counts these 3 years. After his conversion, he didn't immediately go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before he was, but then after a few years had passed, he did go up and got acquainted with Peter. Depending upon your English translation, it may say Cephas here instead of Peter. The original Greek does read Cephas, but some versions translate it as Peter here just for clarity. They're the same person. Peter was his name in Greek. Cephas was the Aramaic equivalent. Even though Jerusalem is south of Damascus, Paul went up to get there since Jerusalem is at a higher elevation. The purpose of this trip obviously wasn't to get permission or approval from the apostles. Paul had already been evangelizing for some time now. Rather, it confirmed that they were all on the same page. The only other bigwig that Paul saw besides Peter was James. Now, this isn't Jesus' disciple James that figures prominently in the 4 Gospels. That James had already been killed by Herod. This was actually Jesus' half-brother James, who had become a prominent leader of the Christian church in Jerusalem. Paul is going to mention him again in chapter 2. Perhaps the reason Paul swears to the truthfulness of these events is that the false teachers were claiming that the Jewish leaders of Christianity in Jerusalem were on their side and not on Paul's side. Paul counters that while his work is not dependent on Jerusalem, that they are on his side. His gospel message is completely consistent with Jerusalem's. Mission work continued in Syria and Cilicia. Those were regions adjacent to each other whose chief cities were Tarsus and Antioch. Tarsus was Paul's hometown. Antioch was an early foothold of the Christian church. Verses 22 to 24 take us back to the region around Jerusalem. When Paul says he was personally unknown to the Christians in the regions around Jerusalem, a question is he referring to the time before he came down to meet with Peter or after? I think this is a reference to what the status was after his 15-day meeting with Peter, which would indicate that his meeting with Peter was a rather low-profile visit without a lot of meet and greets. But word about the great turnaround in Paul's life got around, that God had converted the persecutor of the gospel into the preacher of the gospel. Paul isn't bragging about this. The thanks was going to God. He is demonstrating that his law-free gospel message met with approval even in the heartland of Jewish Christianity. We'll pick up next time with another autobiographical sketch in chapter 2. That one will display some tension in Jerusalem between Paul and what he calls some false brothers. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer. Please give these videos a thumbs up and share them with your friends. I'll see you next time.